Hi, it's Piterom Mendelsundom. Thank you for having me to this event. I have a series of questions here that you've posed to me, and I am now going to attempt to the best of my ability to answer. So the first of these questions is, what description and from which book is the most memorable for you? Why do you think it's so? The description that came to mind for me right away, there's so many candidates, but is from Nabokov's Panin, which is a campus novel that he wrote about an emigre who is a professor at an American university. And it is a description of the main character Panin's thoughts about the many rooms that he's lived in. And I'm going to read it for you now. The accumulation of consecutive rooms in his memory now resembled those displays of grouped elbow chairs on show, and beds and lamps and ingle nooks which, ignoring all space-time distinctions, commingle in the soft light of a furniture store beyond which it snows and the dusk deepens and nobody really loves anybody. So why there are many reasons to love that sentence. Many. It's so masterful in the way in which Nabokov can be. One of the things I love about it is how it moves so rapidly and seamlessly from something very specific and mimetic and grounded in real life to something that's so generalized and metaphysical. And in a way, this is interesting to me, I think, because it maps pretty neatly to what I wrote about and what we see when we read, in the sense that not everything that is a description that we read, we picture optically, as it were, in our brains. So the beginning of the sentence, the accumulation of consecutive rooms in his memory. So for me, that sparks memories of rooms that I have lived in. And the first thing, I think, from a phenomenological perspective that happens to me is I start to imagine those rooms, maybe my childhood bedroom, or a dorm room that I had in college, or a room in a country house that I lived in, or a room in Paris when I lived there. So that's where my mind goes immediately. It doesn't construct a room from scratch. It draws on rooms that I have been in. And I think the point here is that the rooms are being conflated. So it is accumulation of consecutive rooms. So what my mind does then is it combines those rooms. So it might be a bed from one apartment and a chair from another and a table from a house. And which is something I also talk about in the book, the idea of making this kind of Frankenstein monster in our visual imaginations out of multiple parts. And then he goes very specifically to the idea of chairs, very specific kind of chairs, elbow chairs, beds, lamps, ingle nooks, which is a very, like Nabokov, he fell in love with the English language, which obviously wasn't his first, I think it was his third language. And so with that incredible attention to detail and specificity that Nabokov has when it comes to the English language, I love that he chose the word inglenook. So then from there, ignoring all space-time consideration, which is just, we've gone so broad so quickly. We've gone into space-time, which is amazing. So I don't know what my mind does at that point. It pictures things that are affiliated, I guess, with physics classes and Einstein and cosmology, but then he brings it back. All of those pieces of furniture are now in the soft light of a furniture store. So all of a sudden, all of that disparate furniture is now arranged in the window of a place that sells furniture. So this is what his mind has done with all of the places he has lived. And in a way, that's what our mind does as we read this sentence. But then the furniture store, beyond it, it's snowing. Okay, So where are we in space? We're outside of the store. We're somewhere up high, or we have this amazing vista or vantage point. And it's not just snowing, it's snowing at dusk, which is a very particular kind of mood. At this point, we're seeing things, but we're also feeling the affect of snow at dusk, like a gentle snow at the end of the day. And he ends the sentence by saying, and nobody loves anybody, which is what we would call in American English the sting in the tail. So you get through that entire sentence, and at the end there is this grand existential statement. So anyway, I find that sentence incredibly evocative and moving, but also so technically impressive. The freedom of a writer to be able to write prose in that manner is just kind of astounding to me. And I think so few writers do this nowadays, where they will allow themselves that kind of, don't know what the word is, but to be fluid on the page in that way, and to just try things, to try that kind of movement from the specific to the broad. So that is the answer to question number 1. Okay, question number 2. In What We See When We Read, you write about how the reader's imagination is often independent of the text of the book itself. Can you think of an example when you really wandered far away from what is written in the book? That happens with almost every book that I read. And it's not a factor of how much attention I pay to a text. It's just the reason this happens is because it just happens when we read. I do not think that we are all able to properly picture. I mean, it's quite impossible to properly picture what the author has in their mind. They can only describe so many things in a particular scene, unless you're reading a very, very dull book, or unless you're, reading something by Alain Robbe-Grillet, and the whole point is to describe everything in a scene. So my mind is, I don't know if I'd use the word wander, but this is how we read. We read a sentence or a paragraph, and we try to construct from our own memories, inflected by the writing. And so, I don't know, I would have to pull an example at random. The last book I read was Joseph Roth's Radetzky March, which takes place at the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And it takes place largely in Vienna, although there is a long portion that takes place sort of somewhere in the Prussian corridor near the Russian border. And there are all these Austrian soldiers and cavalrymen who are posted to this far outpost. And a couple of things. One is that I have no idea what that area looks like. 2, I don't know what an Austrian dress uniform from the 1890s is. And the men themselves are not really described that well. So, the best I can do is find a way to transplant things from my own mind. I think of a rural area, maybe someplace I've vacationed, maybe the state of Vermont, for instance, in the United States, which is heavily wooded. For the characters, I basically just randomly grab various personages from my own life, from television, from movies, and I sort of, almost by forced migration, sort of push them into my particular scenario. So I guess that would be one example.